The format that we've been using here on Tuesday evenings is we have a period of sitting meditation, and then we take a text and we go through it line by line, sometimes word by word. We've studied various texts. The last two have been the Heart Sutra and now the Yoga Sutra, which was a text written about 2,000 years ago by a sage named Patanjali, who we know almost nothing about. Which makes it interesting to study, partly because we can't turn Patanjali into anybody. There is no figure of Patanjali that you find in Indian art. There are no temples for Patanjali. And we've been reading him as a kind of subversive character who seemed to have compiled many different teachings from his time into a text that is very paradoxical and problematic because of it, which is what makes it so interesting, and probably why it's lasted so long in an oral tradition. So we've been studying this text line by line, and now we're in the first section of the second chapter. And this section is called the klesas, which are usually translated as the causes of suffering. But we've been looking at it as the building blocks of a personality, and how a personality is created out of the conditions of our changing life. And how a personality can be an elastic process. To start off, we talked about how when we have an experience, there is contact. And there is contact between sense organs and sense objects. And when there is sensation, in other words, when there is contact with any sense organ or any sense object, there's feeling. When there's feeling, feeling gives rise to a split. When there's positive feeling, we tend to become attached to it. In other words, you want to repeat pleasurable experience. And when there's negative feeling, we want to lean away from it. And we've explored together how attachment and aversion, or raga and dvesha, are actually two sides of the same coin. That when you look closely at attachment, it's actually aversion. Attachment is aversion to what's not pleasurable. And aversion is attachment to what is pleasurable. And when there is attachment or aversion, in other words, when we're leaning into experience or leaning away from experience, this gives birth to a sense of self. This gives birth to an I, me, or mine. And we've used a few examples. One example that we all experience when we're meditating a long time is experiencing discomfort in the body, for example, in the knee. So when there's discomfort in the knee, there is pain, so there's contact, there's feeling. The feeling is negative. And then the language internally begins to change. And we say things like, I am in pain, or my knee is in pain, or the pain is happening to me, or I don't like this. And two things start happening. The creation of a story and awareness of time. So as our sense of self is created, so we also construct a relationship to time. And we know that when there's aversion, there's also a keen sense of time. Because this is Carl Jung's idea of the ego as an eye maker. His definition of ego is it's a defense complex born of liking and disliking. And is always surrounded by this ocean that constantly traumatizes it. Yeah. And that the cork's ability to respond. And I like this idea of the cork, because when you watch a cork on the ocean, it's doing great. Like it bobs under and it comes back up, and if it really goes under, it shoots back up, and it's having a great time out there. Yeah.
So it's agility, back to that idea of agility?
Yeah, it's just like what Fadi was talking about, how when the machine gets derailed, this Deleuze and Guattari concept, that the machine gets derailed, the response is not being devastated, but becoming a kind of virtuoso or agile. Yeah.
Okay.
If you want to open up to the world, you have to take care of yourself. And you take care of yourself in order to forget yourself. And our ability to be an island means we're creating a boundary. We're creating a self. And we're creating a self out of a commitment to non-reactivity. And out of our commitment to non-reactivity, we find parts of ourselves that are surprising. And this is what it means to be creative. And then in finding these parts of ourselves that are surprising, we find a sense of self. We don't get rid of a self. And that process of being surprised is a process of forgetting about oneself. And same thing when we're serving others. You cannot serve others unless you take care of yourself. The mechanism in the mind that creates this story is called the ahamkara, which comes from the word aha, like aham or mamam, which is I, and kara, which is from the root kur, which means to make, which is where we get the word karma, which means to create. So ahamkara literally means the I maker, or that mechanism inside of us that seems to create a sense of self. What happens with the technology of meditation is that the storyteller is actually related to the way we breathe. And so the chitta, or the patterning of the mind, is directly related to the patterning of the breathing. And so as we start to let the breath get really, really quiet, the storyteller also starts getting really, really quiet. And that's why I think you can't really know that kind of concentration without storytelling through asana practice. Because there's so much movement. It really requires a subtlety of breathing and a quietness of breathing to get that concentrated.